This video is part of a webinar series on Hindudvesha, an educational series to explore and expose systemic Hindu phobia.
So James Mill came up with this book, History of British India, in 1817. And when I assess that book objectively, I consider it nothing short of hate literature. James Mill was born in 1773 in Scotland. So James Mill basically sent to University of Edinburgh, where he did his master's in divinity. He decided to come to London in 1802. For the next 4 years, he spent his time as a journalist writing for different journals and newspapers, making a living. Somehow in 1806, he stumbled upon the idea of writing history of British India, and this book took 12 years. It was a roaring success, which endeared him to the board of directors of East India Company. And in May 1819, James Mill was hired as an officer in East India Company. So he rose up the ranks very, very quickly. James Mill exerted a massive influence on the policies of India, and the history of British India basically became the primary book for making structural changes in governance and rule of India. This book became the required reading for English civil servants. Ronald Eden, in Imagining India, calls this text as a hegemonic text. And why does he call it a hegemonic text? Because there are different ways in which Hindus are described as rude, savage, barbaric, uncouth, and so on and so forth. One of the primary modes in which the description was made was that Hindus are hierarchical and oppressive. And Hindus have been hierarchical and oppressive right from the very beginning. He gives significant space to describing Hindus as women oppressors. Because of the position that James Mill acquired in East India Company, he was able to induce organizational and structural changes in India, which deformed the Indian social system in a very, very big way. His research was picked up by Hegel. Hegel influenced Marx. So the writings and contentions of James Mill traveled through Hegel to Marx. So this entire left narrative, which is operational in academia at this point in time, basically regurgitates what James Mill wrote 200 years ago. And that is the reason when you look at the textbooks for children in the United States, you will see that the entire narrative on Hinduism revolves around this particular equation. Hinduism equals caste system, equals hierarchy, equals oppression. Now in 1825, James Mill and the group with which he was working decided to put together University of London. Now through University of London also incorporated the thoughts of James Mill, which included his thoughts in History of British India. Later, Oxford University Press and Cambridge University Press came with their own editions of History of British India. And when you compare these books with what James Mill produced, you will see that the plan that James Mill had put in place is actually getting replicated in these publications. 1850s onwards, institutions and universities began to get established in India. And History of British India and other publications from Oxford University Press and Cambridge University Press began to find traction in the curriculum which was meant for Indians. And that is how the narrative which James Mill had put in place began to actually get internalized, replicated, and reproduced. In fact, Kalyan Vishwanathan has done some research. He analyzed Jawaharlal Nehru's Discovery of India. And there are many passages in Discovery of India which are exact replications of what you find in History of British India. And after 1970s, the left historians or the Marxist historians, they took over the Indian intellectual scene. And all these forces, basically began to combine. And that is why both in India as well as in the United States, what you find in contemporary times is replication of the same discourse which had been put together by James Mill long time ago. Of course, this narrative has been sanitized. It has been made politically correct. But all the characteristics that were used to define Hindus as savages and barbarians, they remain in place. And that is why children growing up in this country get badly affected by the discourse which gets introduced to them from 6th grade onwards. And what does this narrative do to them? It produces inferiority complex, it produces shame, and it produces guilt. And that is why it becomes extremely important that we critically examine this text and enumerate the various ways in which the replication of this discourse continues in contemporary times. In fact, after having researched this field for close to 2 decades now, I can safely say that whenever you will find a Hindu-Dveshik content in academia or media, you will be able to find its connection with the writings of James Mill. And that is why Hindus at this point in time need to read those 7 chapters that have been written by James Mill. And what we call in academic parlance, start deconstructing the Hindu-Dveshik discourse in the light of narrative put forth by James Mill.